In Ultimatum League, we are going to be given a choice. We can either take the easy road out, accomplish a small task, and take our pittance. Or we can push ourselves even further than we thought possible, reach for the stars, and reap the bountiful rewards that we know are owed to us. Now, if you're anything like me, you're most likely going to want to go for the second option. And to do that, we are going to need a powerful build, one that is able to handle everything in the game without breaking the budget. Between massive overhauls of the basic loot tables and reworks of almost every single league that you can think of, on top of the Atlas trees that were added to the game in 3.13, Ultimatum League has a ton to explore. So now that we know what we're up against, let's take a look at today's build. Now, as always, I'm going to be giving you 5 powerful league start options so that you can choose the one that looks like it's best suited for your needs. This time around, there are going to be a few classic builds that have been on this list before, however, there are also a few newcomers. My goal for these league start videos is to provide you every single bit of information that you need to have a successful league start. These videos will include complete leveling information, as well as full path of buildings with leveling trees, multiple gear sets, frequently asked questions and notes, as well as anything else that you might need. If you have any further questions that isn't answered in either of these places, you can either come and ask me live on my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/bigducks, or you can come and join my Discord and ask for help from my community. Both of these are linked in the description. And the build we're going to be talking about today is the Poison Blade Vortex Assassin. Now, out of all of the Blade Vortex builds, this is probably one that was least impacted by the nerfs, and our damage is going to be more than fine. Now, if you're curious as to why this build has been such a staple for so long and been in so many of my league start guides, is that it accomplishes basically everything that you would want from a league start, and you can go from the beginning all the way till the end of the game with absolutely no issues whatsoever. This build moves insanely quickly, is extremely tanky, does very good clear as well as very good single target. Now, it isn't going to be the absolute best at each and every one of these things, but it is still extremely good in all of them. The main thing that I feel a lot of people get wrong with Poison Blade Vortex is they don't realize that while clearing, you're supposed to utilize Plague Bearer as your main form of clear. Blade Vortex is simply there just to stack Plague Bearer up, but if you focus on maximizing Plague Bearer uptime, you will clear significantly faster. Now, this build did use an Explodey chest at one time, however, it is not needed whatsoever. You can absolutely clear without it. The new Explodey chest will still be good for this build, and it is something that you'll want to pick up eventually when you do have the currency. As for single target, this build does significantly high single target damage and is quite tanky. It can take a hit whenever it does get hit, but you have a very small chance of it actually getting hit due to all of the dodge that we have, and then when you do get hit, you have roughly 50,000 effective health pool with all of the defenses that this build has. And then after you do take that hit, there are a variety of ways that this build can heal all the way back up to full quite quickly. If you're clearing, you have multiple abilities that will regen every time that you kill an enemy, and while killing a boss, you can simply use Enduring Cry or a health flask to get all the way back up to full life. We don't get hit very often, so it shouldn't be too big of a deal. Now, when it comes to crit builds and when it comes to poison builds, there is no ascendancy better than the Assassin. The Assassin has sustained a ton of nerfs over the different leagues because of how powerful this ascendancy is. However, all of the nerfs have still not brought this class down, and it is still by far the best for this build. We get tons of dodge chance through gaining elusive on critical strike, we get a ton of crit strike multiplier as well as damage over time multiplier for poison, we get a ton of chance to poison, a ton of recovery whenever an enemy dies with one of our poisons on them, as well as a ton of damage. We are also pseudo-reflect immune depending on how high your crit chance gets. So no matter what they tell you, the Assassin is still excellent. Now, who is the type of player that would want to play the Poison Blade Vortex Assassin over the other builds that I've suggested? Well, if you want something that is a well-rounded character that can do a little bit of everything in this game, doesn't require very much insane gear to get buffed, and is looking for some relatively cheap items early on, this might be the build for you. After sustained nerfs to all of the builds that use the items that this build has, the prices of the gear will most likely continue to go down. So in my opinion, it is a great choice for someone who is looking to just play one build for the entire league and get everything that they need done. Whether that be bossing, clearing high tier maps, or anything else that you can imagine. Now, if this build didn't do it for you, remember that there is a playlist up in the top right corner of the screen now. You can hopefully find something there that'll be better suited to your needs. But if you are looking for an overall tanky, zoomy, fast, mapping, and bossing character, then look no further and let's get into the guide. Hey guys, Big Ducks here, and welcome back to the channel. Now remember, if you're enjoying this style of content, make sure that you like this video so the YouTube knows to recommend you more of it. Also, over 75% of you are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel, so if you're enjoying my particular style of content, make sure that you subscribe so that these videos will show right up in your feed, and you can always change your mind later. Now without further ado, let's get back into the video. Alright boys, so this is the Poison Blade Vortex Assassin, a build that has been around for quite some time, and this is one of the staples of my league starters. It has been around for, I don't know, longer than I can remember at this point, because it is such a solid build. This build has been nerfed more times than I can count, and it still makes it through absolutely perfectly fine. Now, this is a poison build. If you're not sure how poison works, what it is a Chaos Debuff. It is an ailment that is based off of physical and poison damage done. Now this build in particular uses Blade Vortex, which is just a simple ability that we use, and it spins some blades around us and hits up to 7.5 times a second. Now why is this important? The reason why we use this particular ability for a poison build is because it does mainly physical damage, and because the amount of duration that you get per poison is very important, and the more poisons that you can get on a target at one time is also very important. So as you can see here, we get additional critical strike chance per poison affecting the enemy, and we also do recover a percentage of our life per poison affecting the enemy, and then we have increased duration for each poison you have inflicted recently. So we can easily get up to 30 poisons inflicted recently on single target. So that means we're going to get a ton of poison duration, among other things. Now, beyond that, we're going to talk about the skills that we use here and why we choose the ones that we do. So starting out, we have Withering Step. A lot of people ask me, this is one of the main questions that I get on any build that uses Withering Step. Big Ducks, how are you keeping your withers up? Well, I put 12 stacks of my withers in all of my POBs because it is easy to keep 12 wither stacks up with just Withering Step as long as you're playing correctly. So if you look here, this ability has a cooldown time of 2.42 seconds, and it also has a withered duration of 4.9. So the way that this works is that when you do use Withering Step, it stays on you until you use an additional ability. So the idea is that if you wither, hit an ability, and then as soon as it's back up, wither and hit an ability again, you're going to keep 12 stacks of wither on a single target. So if you do that, make sure that you're casting your ability frequently, casting wither every time it's up. That's why I have Withering Step on my left click. And if you're just moving throughout a map like this, you can just simply run around with Withering Step on, and you don't have to worry about it. You can just use it for the movement speed buff, and then you can also use Whirling Blades to enable it as well. So that is how we keep those wither stacks up. Now the next ability that we're going to talk about is going to be Blade Vortex. This is the main ability of our build, and it's the main thing that we're going to use for single target. So we link this with Unleash, and that is the main way that we're going to be able to keep our stacks up. This build does have a decent amount of increased duration on it. Now the idea is between Unleash and between our increased duration, you only have to cast Blade Vortex every 3 or 4 seconds, and you can easily stay at 10 stacks. As you can see, I'm casting it now, and then we just wait a few seconds, and then we cast it again, and we wait a few seconds. You don't have to just spam cast this constantly. You can keep it up only casting every few seconds. And what this does is it puts a spinning buff around us that basically hits a certain amount of times depending on how many stacks that you've got. When you're all the way up at 10 stacks, it's hitting 7.5 times a second, which gives us 30 hits recently. Now why is that important? Because the amount of poisons that we've inflicted recently increases our damage. So that is our main single target ability, and it is also the enabling ability for Plague Bearer. Now what is Plague Bearer? I actually can't show you Plague Bearer unless we kill something, so we're going to have to go into just the Ravaged Square here. So the idea is that Plague Bearer is an ability that you can turn on, and you'll see it up here. It says, while incubating, deal less damage with poison and add to the plague value when you inflict poison. While infecting, deplete the plague value and deal chaos damage over time to surrounding enemies. So the idea is we'll pop on our Blade Vortex and we'll just go hit a couple of things, and you'll notice right away that that Plague Bearer debuff is filling up. Now currently mine can get to around 1 million or so. It could be more if I scale the levels of it a bit more. But then what you'll notice is that after we have that 1 million poison damage here, what you can do is you can enable Plague Bearer and you'll get this aura around you. This aura does a significant amount of damage. It's actually a pretty ridiculous amount of damage over time. And while you're clearing in very high tier maps with all of your flasks going and all of that, as soon as it runs out, you will stack back up to full Plague Bearer almost instantly. It literally takes like under a second to get all the way back to full Plague Bearer stack. This is going to be the main ability that we use to clear. If you're having issues with clear on this build, you're probably not using Plague Bearer enough. This should be on almost constantly. The only time that it ever goes down is when you're trying to stack it back up. Now, ideally you should be linking Plague Bearer with increased area of effect and Empower, but I don't have Empower on this particular character. I could go grab it, but I just don't have it with me at the moment. It's the reason why this slot would be red. You would link this and put it in there. That would substantially increase the damage of it as well if you want more clear from it. Plague Bearer is an interesting ability because damage modifiers don't affect it, and it does seemingly unmitigated damage to enemies. I'm not 100% certain about that, but this build actually does quite good damage to enemies that have a ton of DR, like Delirium enemies and such. So Plague Bearer is very good for that. And moving on to our other abilities, we do have Vol Blade Vortex. This is just a simple ability that we can cast onto the ground, and it is basically a Blade Vortex that moves on its own. Now, interestingly, in 3.14, this is actually going to have 2 stacks. It's going to get a little bit of a damage nerf, but we're going to be able to have 2 of them, which is very nice for bossing. The next ability is going to be one of our 2 movement abilities. We have Flame Dash, and I just use this to cross gaps and just move around. Generally, like if you're on like the Cirrus fight and you want to jump over something, that's what you use Flame Dash for. However, this build does also use Whirling Blades. Now, the reason that we use Whirling Blades is simply because it allows us to move around fast. However, we do get Fortify support from this. So because we have so much attack speed and movement speed and cast speed and all of that built into this build, we can use Whirling Blades to move around as we need to, and if we hit something, we do get the Fortify buff. This is going to give us Fortify, which makes us take less damage from enemy hits. It also does have like an Enduring Cry linked in here. We've got faster attacks, but Enduring Cry we'll talk about in a moment. So the idea is that you're mainly just going to be using Whirling Blades to get around, and if you need to like cross a gap or you need to jump over something like a beam from Cirrus or another boss ability, that's when you would start using Flame Dash. Now, as I said, we do have Enduring Cry. This is mainly just to give us a boost of healing on a boss. I personally don't use a health flask anymore because we have so much recovery on this build. You could use like a panicked flask if you want to. This build scales a ton of defenses through dodge as well as through Wind Dancer. So those 2 things combined with elusive, which we get from our ascendancy, is going to make it so we don't get hit very often. And when we do get hit, it isn't very hard. Without scaling this character very high up, I have 5,500 life here. You could easily get 6 or 7k if you really wanted to scale life. The idea is we're not going to get hit very often, but when we do, you can use Enduring Cry just to heal yourself back up to full really quickly. The last ability that we're going to be seeing on our bar here is Focus. This is something that's going to be given to us from our Devouring Diadem. You do not need this, but it is very powerful. So the idea is that this enchantment on the Devouring Diadem will give you the focused ability, and while you use that, it gives us increased duration of ailments you inflict while focused. Remember how I was talking about how many poisons you have on the enemy is important? Well, when you focus, you'll get that buff for about 4 seconds, and all ailments that you inflict during it will have increased duration, which is a huge buff to damage. You don't need that, but it is nice. And then beyond that, we do use a few auras. We have Vol Haste here. You can use this just as a buff to be running around maps to move a little bit faster. It'll get you a little bit more zoom. We do use Herald of Agony. This gives us some poison chance. This also does give us the actual Agony Crawler, which does some damage. It's not a ton for us right now, but it is some decent damage. And it gives us 10% more poison damage done. And beyond that, we do have Malevolence. This is just a generic more damage over time, as well as increased skill effect duration. Both of those are very powerful for this build. And then we use Skitterbots. Skitterbots is going to give us damage, it's going to give us chill, and then is going to be a layer of our defenses on top of the damage that it does apply. This is just a very good aura. Having chill and having shock is very nice, and it just applies them automatically. One of the better auras that you can get. If you did want to push the build even further, you could get Aspect of the Spider. You could enchant that like on a pair of boots or something like that, or like a ring, start getting some more mana reduction, and then you could use that as well, and that would be even more powerful for this build. And that is pretty much going to be it for the abilities. Now, when it comes to leveling, you actually are going to be leveling with Caustic Arrow and Toxic Rain. It is very simple to level with these abilities. They use most of the same skill points in the tree that we're going to be using for the endgame tree. There's very few that you're going to have to respec. Caustic Arrow is a very, very simple ability. There are links about that in the actual path of building, so you can see all the different things that you're supposed to link it with. Between Caustic Arrow for clearing, as well as Toxic Rain for single target, we should have absolutely no problem getting all the way to 38, which is when we can actually start using Blade Vortex. Now, the reason why you wait so long to get Blade Vortex is simply because Unleash is so important for this build, and you can't actually get Unleash until 38. And at the same time, our first Ascendancy point, the Noxious Strike, is going to give us 40% chance to poison. That plus the Poison Gem is going to give us all of our poison chance early on. So it is important that we wait until around 38 to use Blade Vortex. But the moment that you hit 38 and you can get that Unleash, you can swap over to it, and it is easily a significant damage upgrade. You will notice the difference as soon as you can go over to here and you can just start zooming through stuff. Now, at the same time, I would recommend that you grab Plague Bearer at 24 and just start leveling this up. The same thing that you should be doing with Blade Vortex. Grab both of these abilities as you're leveling up and make sure that you're keeping them leveled for when you swap over. A lot of the gems are going to be the same otherwise, so don't worry too much about that. You can check in the path of building for specific links. Now, beyond that, there are going to be a few things that you can do. When it comes to Poison Blade Vortex, the actual gear that you use really doesn't matter. The only thing that's going to really help is damage over time, as well as like chaos damage and such. Beyond that, physical and chaos damage are the only real things that are going to scale our poison damage. So when it comes to weapons, I personally just keep the bow most of the time and just put my links in there because it's simple to get. You should really mainly be focusing on resists and life. Your damage won't be a problem. You should just focus on using these resist crafts. They're only a transmutation orb early on. Use these to just craft resistances on all of your gears you level up, and you shouldn't have any problems with damage. Just focus on trying to get 3 and 4 links. Make sure that you keep on top of your boots. Try to get yourself some movement speed, and any poison damage or chaos damage over time that you can get is a welcome addition. Now, I do want to talk about gearing a little bit, but we are are going to have to jump over into the path of building so we can see all of the items that we're going to be talking about, so we're going to head over there now. Right, so now that we're over here in the path of building, you might notice that the tree is a little bit different from last time. I've optimized it a decent amount. I've put the new spin on this where we get a little bit more crit. We move the tree in a different way. It should be a little bit better, and the leveling trees are going to be significantly better as well. But here we're talking about gear. Now, when it comes to gear, this gear has not changed basically at all. It is almost exactly the same. I am using a couple different flasks here, but the main thing that we're looking at is we have cold iron points as our weapons. Now, there are other weapons that you can use. You can use obliteration wands, or you can use cold iron points. I know some people are going to say that Beanos are good. I think that Beanos are completely worthless, and I think it's a trash item. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, just use Beanos for clear. And I've proven this more times than I can count now, that instead of using Beanos, just use Plague Bearer. You don't need to use Beanos, it's not good. Use obliteration wands instead very early on. They're extremely cheap and they're way more damage than Beanos. The life regeneration that you used to get from Beanos back in the day sucks now, it's not worth it. Avoid them like the plague. Don't worry about people telling you use Beanos, not good. Cold iron points are the daggers that we're wanting to eventually use because they give us +3 to level of all physical spell skill gems. And plus level of gems is insanely important for this build. Scaling the level of Blade Vortex is going to give us more damage than anything else is going to. Beyond that, we do use the Devouring Diadem. This isn't needed. However, Devouring Diadem is the best in slot helmet for this build because it allows us to use all of our auras, it fixes all of our mana, and it does give us some regeneration from corpses as well. This is very powerful for this build, so keep that in mind. One other thing to note is that explodey effects tend to delete corpses, and it makes it so that Feast of Flesh actually can't proc as often, so do keep that in mind. I actually think that 100% explodey chest was kind of a downgrade for this build a lot of the time. The new explodey chest might actually be better because it will leave some corpses most likely. It'll be an upgrade to defensives for this build. Beyond that, we do have the Embalmer. These aren't really important for the Vile Toxins. You could link your movement skill in here if you really wanted to, but it's not worth it. We mainly use this for the life, the chaos resistance, the poison duration, as I said before, is very important, and the chaos damage. Beyond that, these are just going to be a bunch of random rares. On the rings, you can go for curse enemies with despair on hit. This is an old version of the ring. You would just use whichever increased effectiveness one that you could possibly find. You're mainly looking for life, resists, and so on and so forth. When it comes to the flasks, we use pretty simple flasks. Cinder Swallow Urn, you can actually make use of the enemies ignited by you during flask effect take increased damage by putting a little bit of fire damage on your gear. If you look at one of my rings, I have add fire and cold damage. It has to be generic add fire and cold damage. It can't be to attacks. This has to be generic. And because we have such a high crit chance, close to 80%, anytime that you crit with any amount of fire damage, it automatically ignites, so keep that in mind. So this will give us 10% increased damage. You can get the crit strike chance version of this if you want. It will be a significant damage upgrade, but it is more expensive. Beyond that, we do have Atziri's Promise. This is gain physical, gain elemental as extra chaos damage. Very powerful for this build. We get a bunch of chaos resist. The chaos damage leached as life isn't going to be a ton for us just because we really don't hit that hard. Our average hit is only 10,000, so we're really not hitting super hard, but it'll give us a little bit of leech. We do use a Quartz Flask. This gives us a bunch of dodge as well as phasing so that we can move through enemies easier. And then we do use Coralito's Signature. This is going to give us Perfect Agony, and it also is going to make it so that we have a massive amount of increased duration of poisons as well as chance to poison on hit. This flask is amazing for this build. You can simply take this node if you don't have it, but you don't have to take this node if you already have it. The only time it would be useful is on bosses when you don't have that flask up all the time. So you could take this if you really wanted to, not necessary though. Now beyond that, we just have a bunch of generic jewels. I'll talk about that in a moment. There is a budget gear set you'll see with the obliteration ones here, as well as just a bunch of budget items, and then there are the expensive items here. These are going to be quite a bit more expensive than the standard items that you would normally get, so keep that in mind. More damage, as you can see. We get up to about 20.5 million damage with that, instead of the 10 million that we get with this one, but much more expensive. Now let's talk about the jewels. There is a little bit to talk about here because a couple people have been getting confused about this recently. The jewels themselves, I know these are expensive jewels, but you're just meant to get anything that you can. Damage over time, life, and poison damage are all very good for this build. Poison duration, chaos damage over time multiplier, all of those things are very good for this build. Try to get jewels that have those stats. That is really all that you're looking for. We don't use any specialty jewels. It's really just mainly that poison type jewel. The cluster jewels is something that people are very confused about. There are a ton of cluster jewels that are very good for this build, and I want you to know that. But there's only one node that is really very important for this, and it is Overwhelming Malice. As long as you have this node, Don't worry about anything else. You can get this on a medium crit cluster jewel. You don't need like the Wicked Paul or any of the other stuff here. You can just get this and be more than fine. The large clusters that have like chaos damage on them are very good just because there's not really a lot of other places to put points into, but you don't need anything but Overwhelming Malice. I personally, on my character, just used a medium crit cluster with Overwhelming Malice on it and was more than fine. That is really going to be it with the cluster jewels. You could get like chaos damage over time, medium clusters, and a bunch of other stuff, but it isn't really needed on this build. There are enough things for us to put points into on the tree that it's not really required. Now, speaking of the trees, let's talk about the leveling trees. These have changed a decent amount. So the idea is early on, we're going to be moving out through physical and chaos damage. We're going to be grabbing this life and generic damage here, going through these damage over time nodes, grabbing some damage and life here, moving down, and we are going to start grabbing these bow and bow damage over time nodes early on because this Hunter's Gambit node is actually quite good, even for later on. It gives us skill effect duration, and it gives us chaos damage over time multiplier. This will help a ton with our early leveling when it comes to using Caustic Arrow and Toxic Rain. Then we're going to be moving up here, grabbing this life. We're going to be moving down this way, grabbing all of our dodge as early as we can, and then grabbing this resist and maximum resist here. Now, our first ascendancy point is going to be Noxious Strike. You don't need to go and get this until you are ready to change over to Poison Blade Vortex. You can ignore this until about 38 if you like. That's perfectly fine. We do want to get this first, but it's not going to do almost anything for us until we actually do get it. Now, the next tree is where the deviation actually happens from before. Used to, I would head over to the left and get into these nodes over here. However, I don't actually feel like that's necessary. Even with the nerfs, the increased duration is not really that required very early on. You can have like 3 to 6 stacks of Poison Blade Vortex and still be perfectly fine. So what we're going to be doing instead is we're going to be moving up through damage. So we're going to come up here, we're going to grab these damage over time and regeneration nodes, we're going to grab this life, and then we're going to grab these chaos damage over time nodes just to supplement our damage early on. The next node that we're going to be getting is going to be Mistwalker. This gives us Elusive. Elusive is insanely powerful for this build. It gives us dodge, spell dodge, movement speed, and a whole bunch of really, really good stuff, and we take no extra damage from critical strikes while we are elusive. It's a very, very good node for leveling. Now, the next tree that we're going to be is going to be closer to ending the campaign. You'll notice that we do change a few points around here. We're moving out these couple points, and we're going to start scaling crit. So we're moving through these crit nodes here. We're going to be grabbing these poison nodes here, moving down, and we're going to be heading towards Wind Dancer now. This is a huge defensive buff for us. We move through this life, grab this life as well, and Wind Dancer is going to be really, really important for not getting one-shot by bosses. Next thing is going to be the skill point quest that we finish up. We're going to be grabbing this little bit of life here and moving up towards these nodes here and this increased duration. Around this point is when you're really going to start feeling the need for this duration as well as some of these life nodes, so we're going to move towards there next. The next part of the tree is going to be when we do actually get into endgame. The main things we're grabbing here are we're going to start grabbing more crit, and we are going to start grabbing more life. We're going to be grabbing these resist nodes here. We're going to be grabbing a bunch of jewels, some poison damage here. We are going to be grabbing the jewels here, the crit here, and the life here, like I said before. Beyond that, there is going to be the final tree here. We do fill in a couple of points. We grab some crit towards the end of the game here. We finish out these crit and physical damage nodes as well as some life. You can get the cluster jewels whenever you're ready to. It really doesn't matter when you get them. You can get them earlier, you can get them later, whichever you like. And we also do fill out these final life nodes here. That is the majority of what's going on with the tree. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about path of building in general and what is included in this path of building. In the skills section, you will notice there is a bunch of leveling skills. It will have the links that you should be using early game. Caustic Arrow, Toxic Rain, it'll tell you what auras I suggest that you use. Check out these and make sure that you're using the correct links early on, and then it will also show you the leveling auras and the leveling abilities that you should be using for Blade Vortex. So take a look at these, and then when you move into the endgame links, these are all here as well, so you can move towards these endgame links as soon as you're ready. As well as I said, there are multiple gear sets in the item section, and beyond that, make sure that you check out the configuration. Most of this should be correct, and I will go over a few of these because it's important. The nodes that you should be noticing here is the number of rare unique enemies nearby. This is because of our ascendancy here. I didn't talk about these other ascendancies yet, so I'll do them now, and I wanted to wait because they're important for these two things. So the opportunistic is the one that we're going to get last, and this is the reason why that node is there. So you'll see that it says 25% more damage while there is at most 1 rare unique enemy nearby, and then 20% reduced damage taken while there are at least 2 rare unique enemies nearby. And then the next thing is going to be number of poisons applied recently. This is going to be 30, and the reason that is because we have a hit rate of 7.5, and recently means the last 4 seconds. Take 7.5 times 4, what do you get? That's the idea behind having that at 30, and it does matter because of this node here. We do get increased duration from this node. It gives us increased poison duration for every poison we've inflicted recently, and you can see that depending on how many poisons we have on it, we crit more often. This also just gives us poison you inflict with critical strikes, still 50% more damage. Now the other things in here are going to be the wither stacks. I told you before about the wither stacks. If you are going to be using Withering Step and you use it properly, you can keep 12 stacks on an enemy, no issue whatsoever. Beyond that, everything else should be relatively straightforward. We're on Cirrus. The last thing I do want to talk about are the notes. There are pretty extensive notes in here. This is going to be the place that you're going to be looking for a lot of the information about the build, and if you can't find something in here, make sure to check back in the video later on. And that is going to be it for the video. Remember, if you do have any further questions that weren't answered in the POB or in this video, make sure that you check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/bigducks. I'm going to be live quite often, so if you have a question, I might be able to answer it there live for you. And if I'm not live or I wasn't able to answer your question, try checking out the Discord. They are both linked in the description down below. Best place to get help from just my community in general. I'd love for you to become a part of my community as well, so make sure that you check that out. This build absolutely does everything that you need it to. It's been a long time staple of my channel. I've just enjoyed this build for quite some time. Very, very good build for League Start. Very good build for just pushing through all of the content in the game. It's very comfortable, doesn't require very much gear, and can do pretty much all of it. So remember guys, if you enjoy this content, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in raid class. And I'll see you guys in 3.14 Ultimatum League.